Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to The World Over Live from our new studio here in Washington. We couldn't be happier to be back with you, and that is not a cardboard cutout of the Capitol behind me there. We've got a great program for you tonight. While the GOP race for the House, White House heats up and gets downright nasty in Florida, the president is sounding like a populist. We'll unpack it all with editor-in-chief of CNS News, Terry Jeffrey. And later, there's renewed tension between church and state in the U.S. The Obama administration is insisting that Catholic institutions include contraceptive and sterilization coverage in their health care plans. Deirdre McQuade of the Bishop's Pro-Life Secretariat and Anthony Picarello, the General Counsel for the conference, will discuss. If you have a question, give us a ring, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally, 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. We're here live. Much more to come. But first, here's the brief news from the world over this week. Widespread rebuke continued for the Obama administration this week after the Department of Health and Human Services announced that nearly all religious organizations will be required to provide free contraceptive coverage in their health plans, including sterilization and abortifacient drugs. For the second time in 4 days, head of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Timothy Dolan, criticized the mandate as an unprecedented attack on religious liberty. In an editorial for the Wall Street Journal, the Archbishop of New York wrote, he felt betrayed by President Barack Obama. The two met in the White House in November. According to Archbishop Dolan, quote, the president seemed very earnest and said he considered the protection of conscience sacred, that he didn't want anything his administration would do to impede the work of the church that he claimed he held in high regard, end quote. HHS is giving religious organizations 1 year to comply. Religious leaders across the country and across ideologies have uniformly denounced the HHS mandate. And in a related story, the Professor Pope might soon be known as a prophet. Just 1 day prior to the HHS announcement, Pope Benedict XVI warned visiting American bishops about the erosion of religious freedom in the United States. He said it's imperative that the entire Catholic community in the U.S. come to realize the grave threats to the Church's public moral witness presented by a radical secularism, which finds increasing expression in the political and cultural spheres. And more violence in Nicaragua, where Christians, or Nigeria rather, where Christians and government entities were targeted by Islamic terrorists. This past Friday, the Islamic group Boko Haram claimed responsibility for coordinated attacks on government buildings. More than 150 were killed, and on Sunday, 2 churches were bombed in the Muslim-dominated region of northern Nigeria. Boko Haram seeks to implement strict Sharia law and avenge the deaths of Muslims. According to a count by the Associated Press, the group's attacks on government or offices and churches have killed 226 people this year. That is already more than half the number killed by the terrorist group last year when it began its campaign of violence. And the annual March for Life in Washington, D.C. marked the 39th anniversary of the U.S. Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision legalizing abortion. Unofficial estimates claim that as many as 400,000 people braved the near-freezing rain marching from the Capitol Mall to the Supreme Court. Republican House Speaker John Boehner delivered the opening remarks on the mall, praising the work of Congress's bipartisan pro-life majority.
For me to serve with men and women committed to protecting the sanctity of life. But we may disagree in a lot of other areas and sometimes starkly, but we are one on the same when it comes to this issue. Because human life is not a political or economic commodity, and defending life is not a member of party, it's about standing on principle.
The U.S. House on Tuesday passed two bills endorsing the use of religious symbols at war memorials. The first bill would codify the existing practice of allowing religious symbols at military monuments established or acquired by the federal government. The bill was introduced in response to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling last year that found unconstitutional the Mount Soledad War Memorial Cross near San Diego. The second bill directs the Interior Department to add the World War II memorial in Washington to add a plaque with the prayer of Franklin Roosevelt, which he delivered to the nation on D-Day. The Bureau of Land Management had previously rejected the prayer, citing a law that bars adding new commemorative work that encroaches on an existing one. And according to a report on Italian television, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the recently appointed Holy See ambassador to the U.S., was forced out of his top Vatican position after complaining about corruption within the bureaucracy. Last March, 7 months before his transfer, Archbishop Vigano wrote to Pope Benedict saying that a transfer would cause confusion and dismay among those who believed it was possible to correct the many problems of corruption and waste at the Vatican. From 2009 until last year, the Archbishop was the #2 official at the Vatican city-state Governato. While there, he said he found a disastrous pattern of insider deals and favoritism. The Archbishop's reforms likely brought millions of euros in savings to the operations of the Vatican government, but created conflict with individual administrators. The Vatican has denied the Italian TV report. And Catholic Healthcare West, one of the nation's largest healthcare systems, has severed its formal ties with the Catholic Church. CHW announced on Monday that it will now be known as Dignity Health. In 2010, Bishop Thomas Olmsted of Phoenix announced that neither CHW or its St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix could rightly be identified as a Catholic institution. This after a controversy over an abortion performed at the hospital. At the time, Bishop Olmsted reported that in his investigation of the abortion incident, communications with hospital leadership have only eroded my confidence about their commitment to the Church's ethical and religious directives for health care, he wrote. An official for Dignity Health said that the change would enable its corporation to flourish and that their vision and values have not changed. The group oversees 40 hospitals in California, Arizona, and Nevada. And finally, in outlining his message for World Communication Day 2012, Pope Benedict shared one word of advice for communicating effectively in the digital age. Shh! Silence, he said, is now needed more than ever in the noisy world of constant communication. The Holy Father said silence allows us to distinguish between what's important from what is insignificant or secondary. And the pairing of words and silence is essential so as not to be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of communication itself. To this end, the Pope recommended an equilibrium between words, images, sound, and silence. When we return from our 2 minutes of silence, we will be joined by Terry Jeffrey. We'll talk about the President's State of the Union and the contentious GOP race in Florida. If you have a question for Terry, give us a ring, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email worldover@awtn.com. We'll be right back.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
This has been a busy political week. Two major debates in Florida, charges flying back and forth between the top Republicans, and a resurgent President Obama. To unpack it all, we're joined by Terry Jeffrey, the editor-in-chief of CNSnews.com. Terry, thanks for being here.
Hey, Raymond, it's good.
Pleasure to
nice
see
new
you.
digs you have.
How do you like this?
It's
and
beautiful.
What a view. Isn't it a nice
It's
view?
fantastic.
Yeah, well, you were familiar. You were in this room a few times before when some
Yeah,
other
a few
shows
times,
were here.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about these polls that we see coming out. It seems to be a dead heat in a few of them. You've got Romney at 36, Newt Gingrich at 34, Rick Santorum down at 11, and Ron Paul at 9. Now, some polls have Romney a little further up by 8 points. What do you make of this? What's happening in this race?
Well, there's no doubt there's been a race all along to see who's going to emerge as the conservative alternative to Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney seems to be the establishment candidate. Now it's really down to Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich over who's going to be the conservative candidate. And Newt had the advantage coming out of South Carolina. There's no doubt about it. I think Santorum didn't get the kind of boost he might have gotten had we had a correct and early decision out of Iowa.
Yeah.
But this race is going to go on for a while, I think, Raymond.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment about what we're seeing in Washington. This week, Bob Dole came out and said, look, like so many of Newt Gingrich's colleagues, he's a one-man show. He doesn't listen to anybody else. He's unelectable. We should not have a man like this lead the charge. Then you've got Nancy Pelosi on the other side saying the same thing. He won't be president. He can't be president. What is this almost visceral dislike that the establishment on both the right and left have toward Newt Gingrich?
Well, you know, I think it's not just Newt. I think if you go back and look at almost any presidential campaign where there's a candidate of the establishment will get pretty brutal in defending that candidate. I know when I managed Pat Buchanan's campaign in 1996, there was a period, Raymond, before Buchanan won the New Hampshire primary, where the liberal press loved the guy because they thought he would do damage to the Republican Party. Once he emerged as a viable candidate, they unloaded on him the way they're unloading on Gingrich right now. So, it's ironic. Newt Gingrich is a guy who's basically spent most of his adult life inside the Beltway, a part of the political establishment, yet they see him as a threat.
Yeah.
Which I think
but why? What do they fear? What's the great fear? I mean, he knows all of these people. He's worked with so many of them.
Well, first of all, I think they want Romney. I think Romney's. I think they would prefer Romney. I think Newt basically is a conservative. I disagree with him on a lot of issues, but I think he's basically a conservative. I don't believe that Mitt Romney basically is a conservative, honestly.
There's a lot of the charges, though, are really ugly, particularly this week, and personal. We hear about Mitt Romney's the accounts he has in Switzerland, and then we hear about Newt Gingrich's failings personally and otherwise. Has this campaign gotten so personal that these guys are going to have mutual assured self-destruction here?
I hope not. Personally, I think some of these are legitimate issues. If you're going to run for president, they're going to come out. People are going to look at them. Voters are going to make a judgment. But really, there's such important issues facing our country. I mean, of course, there are the social and cultural issues. We've had more than 50 million babies aborted in this country since Roe v. Wade. This week we had the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. There's a question of whether same-sex marriage is going to be institutionalized in this country and whether we're actually going to have a president who's going to fight back against it. But there's also the economic fate of the country. And we know 2 years ago we had an election about a country that was deep in debt, that was heading towards a fiscal cliff. We now have $15 trillion in debt that's bigger than our GDP. And that's not even being talked about in this campaign.
No, it's getting obscured by all of these personal gotcha moments. And, there's another debate. It's going to be more gotcha, and has the theatricality of all of that, the American Idol aspect of this sort of overshadowed true policy disagreements that we need to discuss in an open forum?
I think it could be. I'll say one thing. I like the fact that we get to see the candidates speak and address the people directly. I wish the debates were more serious. One of the things they're taking away, it used to be that a candidate could go out and really drive his message into the press if he was a smart candidate.
Right.
Now, that's not happening. These guys, no one's really paying attention to what are the economic plans these guys are offering. What are they offering to do on the social and cultural front? That's not happening. And I wish that they could take this tremendous magnet that these debates have become for public attention and use them for a more focused and serious discussion of these serious issues.
Let's talk for a moment about the way the evangelical and the Catholic vote broke down in South Carolina. When you look at these numbers, and they are staggering, 44% of the Catholic vote, the evangelical vote rather, went to Newt Gingrich. When you look at the Catholic vote, 37% of the Catholic vote also went to Newt Gingrich. Romney followed with 29%, Rick Santorum with 15%. Why did that was a block of voters these faith-based voters, that many of the pundits here in Washington said if there's one group that will abandon Newt Gingrich, it will be this group because of his personal transgressions. What happened?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on there. One, there's a question of redemption. I mean, I don't think Newt Gingrich is saying he didn't do these things. He's saying he did them and he's sorry for them. And I think evangelical Christians and Catholics understand that. The second thing is I think most voters really judge candidates about where they stand on the issues. I don't think social conservatives, whether they're Catholic or evangelical Christian, trust Mitt Romney on the social issues.
Why not? Look, you got Marianne Glendon out there. You've got 5 Vatican ambassadors saying this is our guy. Why not?
Well, I'll tell you one thing is, as far as I understand Mitt Romney's position right now, and if I'm wrong, let the Romney campaign correct me, but I've looked into it. It seems to me his position on marriage is that he doesn't want homosexuals to be able to use the word marriage, but he's okay with civil unions that essentially are the facsimile of marriage, right up in including the adoption of children. In fact, he was interviewed by Wolf Blitzer on CNN in the 2008 campaign, and he actually said that same-sex couples have the right to have children. Now, as Catholics, we believe that children have a right to a mother and father, and that family ought to come out of the institution of real marriage. There's not a single same-sex couple in the history of the world that has created a child through procreation, but Romney's for that. Now, I think he ought to explain that, and I think that people have looked at it, have a problem with it. Secondly, on the issue of abortion, my understanding of Mitt Romney's position on abortion is although he wants to overturn Roe v. Wade, he's not favoring federal action. Now, the Republican Party platform that conservatives and pro-lifers have fought for years to preserve actually says that the party favors federal legislation to make clear that the 14th Amendment right of equal protection of the law goes to the unborn child. Now, if an unborn child has the 14th Amendment right, which it ought to have, there can be no abortion. The federal government has a duty to protect the right to life of an unborn child. My understanding is Romney does not have that position. And I think he ought to be smoked out on it, but I think there's a lot of smart voters out there, Raymond, who have been looking at this, and they have good reason not to trust Romney on this issue.
Gingrich is now raising the question of whether Romney Care was the inspiration for Obamacare. And there seems to be some crossover in the consultants, the people who shaped Governor Romney's plan in Massachusetts, also helped shape President Obama's plan here in the Capitol.
Right, I don't think there's any doubt about it. If you object to the basic dynamics of Obamacare, which is the government telling you and me and our families what to do about health care, which leads to these problems like the government telling the Catholic Church and Catholics you have to buy sterilizations and abortifacients.
Which we're going to get into in our next segment.
You don't want the government on any level having that kind of interference in the individual liberty of people, which Romney did in Massachusetts, but there's more to it. And this did come up in one of the debates. There is a policy board, a governing policy board of Romney Care in Massachusetts. The law expressly gives Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts the power to name a person to that board. There's no pro-life group that names a person to the board. There's no Catholic group that names a person to the board. But Planned Parenthood, the leading abortionist in this country, names a person to the policy board of Mitt Romney's health care plan.
Yeah, no, it's a cause for concern. I know it's a reason. Is that why you think particularly religious-minded voters are having qualms coming to grips with Romney? And why isn't Rick Santorum taking off? I mean, here's a guy who's straight down the line on so many of these social issues you just talked about.
Well, I agree with you. First of all, Rick Santorum is 100% right on the social and cultural issues from a Catholic point of view.
Okay.
He has a Catholic position on abortion. He has a Catholic position on marriage. He's been courageous in his career in defending these positions. And I do believe Rick Santorum still has a chance. I mean, you talk about this sort of grappling and fighting back and forth between Gingrich and Romney. It's, Santorum could, sort of run by that and take the lead. He hasn't done it in Florida. And I think part of his problem may be whereas he gave a wonderful speech the night he won the Iowa caucus and we didn't know it. And I don't think he's really found his voice, that kind of voice that Newt Gingrich so compellingly has in the debates.
Yeah, nobody frames the issues the way Newt Gingrich can.
Right.
But he's been doing it for 3 decades, Terry. Right. I mean, he's the professor. He held court here when he was speaker for all those years. It was part and parcel. It's a well-tested habit. And he's so good at it. I mean, nobody comes close to him. What role does Ron Paul play in this season?
Well,
he's a pro-lifer too.
He is, although he also doesn't want federal action. He actually has an interesting position. Ron Paul says, yes, he thinks that the 14th Amendment right ought to apply to the unborn child. There's a person from the moment of conception. He doesn't want the federal government involved.
He wants to throw it to the states.
I would like him to explain that. If the child has 14th Amendment rights, the federal government has a duty to protect the equal protection of the child in the state. So I don't understand. He is pro-life. I don't understand how he takes that position. But what Ron Paul's doing on one level, Raymond, I think, is articulating this vision of limited government and getting our fiscal order in control that none of the other candidates are expressing so forcefully. He's doing that. I think a lot of people have very legitimate concerns about his foreign policy, which I think, quite frankly, is simplistic. But what he is taking conservative votes away from the other two candidates, and I don't think he's going to get the nomination. So basically, tactically, he's helping Romney at this point.
Interesting. Let's talk one moment about immigration before we go on to the President's State of the Union address. Immigration has emerged, certainly in Florida, as a key issue. Gingrich has staked out an interesting position. He doesn't want families separated, which is consistent with what the Catholic bishops have been asking for. He supports aspects of the DREAM Act so long as people serve in the military. He wants to give them a path to citizenship. What's the problem with that? Well,
I think Rick Santorum has actually made this point in some of the debates. If you are in the United States for an extended period of time and you're here illegally and you're working, it's almost impossible for you not to commit document fraud, not to, for example, fraudulently use a Social Security number that you've either stolen from someone else or made up. You have employers in this country. The GAO used to do studies. They don't do it anymore now that Obama's in power. But they used to study how many, they call them no-match W-2s, get sent to the IRS, like 9 million a year. So you're, in fact, in John McCain's comprehensive immigration reform, which we conservatives call an amnesty, there was a provision that expressly immunized illegal aliens from being prosecuted for this sort of document fraud and identity theft. And I think that's wrong, and people have to, those are felonies, people have to grapple with it, and I think that here's one place Mitt Romney's right. If you enforce the law at the workplace, and you say these employers are in fact exploiting illegal labor, and you say, if you do that, we're going to come after you, and the jobs go away, those folks who are here for jobs who aren't criminals, they're going to go home. And then let's have a legal system.
I want to go to the phones very quickly. Carol from California, you've got a question for Terry. Go ahead. What is it?
I do. Thank you, Raymond. It's nice to be on the show. I was one of your faithful guests there in the past, blonde, curly hair lady. But anyway, I, as a faithful Catholic, am concerned about Gingrich. Is he going to be faithful to the presidency, as he has not been faithful to his past two wives?
She wants to know, is it a concern? She's worried about Newt Gingrich because he hasn't been faithful to his past two wives. Is he going to be faithful to the American voter?
Well, it's a legitimate question. I think it's a very legitimate question. And, I think basically the argument Gingrich is making to people is he has gone through a religious conversion. He's a different person now than he was 12 years ago. And I think it's a good question. People have a right to make that judgment. It's a legitimate question. And, I think the way Gingrich comports himself on the campaign is going to go a long way to which way people answer that question.
Very good. I want to show you some clips from the President's State of the Union address. Here's the first. I guess you could call this the America Built to Last clip. We'll roll this for Terry.
Has had someone close to them. We don't begrudge financial success in this country. We admire it. When Americans talk about folks like me paying my fair share of taxes, it's not because they envy the rich. They know that this generation's success is only possible because past generations felt a responsibility to each other and to the future of their country. And they know our way of life will only endure if we feel that same sense of shared responsibility. That's how we'll reduce our deficit. That's an America built to last.
Okay. Now, is that an America built to last?
Well, as a vague principle without any policy attached to it, that's not a bad statement that the president made.
But this is part of that Buffett rule where he wants the upper income earners to pay more, to pay their fair share. Is it their fair share?
No. In fact, there was a falsehood that the president, in fact, the White House actually put up a contradiction of a statement he made when he was making that argument, which he's argued that the top 1%, their income has gone up incredibly, which it has, about 275% since 1979 in inflation-adjusted terms. He argues that the middle class, their wages have been stagnant or gone down. The fact is that same CBO study that he cites shows that people in the middle 60% have seen their income go up by almost 40% in real terms. But I think the income of the middle class really is endangered now, not for the reason he's talking about. It's endangered because the free enterprise system, which basically relies on the government standing back with a few rules and a few laws so there is some order, but letting people through their energy and imagination create jobs and create wealth. That is truly threatened by the welfare state today. And in the people who create jobs and create wealth, if we're going to go after them and persecute them with more government, we're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg in this country.
I want you to watch one more bite, but before we get to that, when you listen to not the words the president used, the tonality, the posture, the populist ring of his words, that's an awfully hard competitor for these GOP candidates to go up against, particularly after they have savaged themselves in this primary season, Terry, isn't it?
Well, you know what? I honestly think, Raymond, I don't think Mitt Romney will be a good debater against this guy because he's so plastic. That's my personal view. I think that Rick Santorum has the force of sincerity when he's at his best. You know, you can tell this guy's speaking.
Earnest.
He's speaking from his heart. He's who he is. He's, you know, I don't agree with the guy on some issues, but you can tell this is an honest man. Newt Gingrich, as you said, he's brilliant, and he's very articulate, and he's very glib, and he would be an excellent debater. And I don't think on the basis of head-to-head weighing who is the better rhetorician that Obama is going to beat the Republican candidate in this race.
No, I mean the style, his approach, his razzle-dazzle. You look at that and you think, who's going to compete with that at that level? We'll see. I mean, we'll see. This contest is coming. I want to play one other bite for you. This is the president talking about religious freedom or alluding to it in his speech. Give a look.
We will advocate for those values that have served our own country so well. We will stand against violence and intimidation. We will stand for the rights and dignity of all human beings, men and women, Christians, Muslims, and Jews. We will support policies that lead to strong and stable democracies and open markets because tyranny is no match for liberty.
We had the president there. It was his only mention of Christians, Jews, you know, other faiths. What do you make of this? Is this just rhetoric or serious?
It's gross hypocrisy, Raymond. I know in the rest of your show you're going to be talking about this HHS regulation.
Yeah, and I want to get into that with you.
What people should realize about this regulation is it's not just about Catholic hospitals, universities, and Catholic charitable. It's about you and me. It's about every Catholic citizen in this country. This regulation under Obamacare says that every health plan in this country that's not actually sold to a church must cover artificial contraceptives, including those that induce abortion and sterilizations. Our faith says these are a violation of the natural law. They're wrong. We can't do it. He's saying the government can tell us we must violate our faith. I say no. And I say Catholics have to stand up against this guy. They have to have a public debate. We have to force it into the establishment media. This is a clear violation of the free exercise of religion guaranteed by the First Amendment. It is, in fact, a tyrannical act. We know the establishment press will not be on our side. We have bishops now who are leading us. Archbishop Dolan in New York is doing an outstanding job. They've put together this new commission on religious liberty with Bishop Laurie. The bishops, I believe, are going to go nose to nose with the president. The Catholic lay people of this country have to get behind the bishops. Congressmen like John Boehner, who's a Roman Catholic, who's the Speaker of the House, have to stand up and fight and defend their faith in their position of authority using the constitutional powers given to them. But this is something I don't think we've ever seen in our country before. You quoted the Archbishop saying this is an unprecedented attack on religious liberty. It is, in fact. You quoted the statement that the Pope made last Friday, pointing out that religious liberty is threatened in this country. Who believed in our generation that we'd face a crisis like this?
Let me ask you this question before we go. Why would a president on the edge of a very contentious season, when he's facing re-election and he's at 49% approval rating, or lower, depending on the week, why would he seek to offend so many voters, particularly Catholic swing voters in key states he needs for a victory?
I think his arrogance is unfathomable. Talk about dignity of human life. This was the only man in the Illinois State Senate who stood up and spoke against an act that would have protected the life of a child after it was born, the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. Now he's so arrogant, he thinks he can take away the religious liberty of Catholics, and we won't fight. Well, I got news for him. We're going to fight.
Very good. Terry Jeffrey, thanks so much for being
Raymond.
here and for the passion. And I hope you'll come back. Terry Jeffrey's columns and all the important political news can be found at cnsnews.com. When we return, Deirdre McQuade and Anthony Picarello from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are here to tell us how the bishops are reacting to the new health care mandate that threatens conscience rights in the U.S. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. Conscience rights are in jeopardy due to a proposed Health and Human Services mandate that would force nearly all private health care plans to offer contraceptives and sterilization services. The Catholic Church was hoping to get an exemption from the policy, but this week they were informed that they would not be getting one. I'm joined on set by Anthony Picarello. He's the General Counsel to the USCCB, and Deirdre McQuade, the Assistant Director of Policy and Communications for the Bishop's Pro-Life Secretariat. Thank you both for being here on this important issue. Let's first start with, this is really part of the health care law, okay? I know you all were looking for an exception. What happened? Weren't you assured you'd get one?
Well, you know, the health care law mandates preventive services to be required.
And this is a preventive service.
Right, and that makes sense when you're talking about preventive services that prevent disease. So things like mammograms and colonoscopies and diabetes screening, all that good stuff. Right. But when you throw in contraception, sterilization, what you're preventing is not a disease, but a person. And that was the kind of thing that was anticipated at the time that the statute was proposed, and the bishops objected to that. And they basically said, you know, this language is problematic and it can be manipulated in a bad way, and sure enough, that's exactly the way it's been manipulated. When it was manipulated that way, there was an itty-bitty religious exemption that was proposed along with it.
Right.
And that is, it's just the eye of the needle, and very, very few institutions
That's
fit
what
through
we keep hearing this week, Deirdre. We keep hearing you have a religious exemption. What are you upset about? There's a religious exemption for religious organizations right there. What's wrong with it?
Well, as we could point out, even Jesus and his disciples wouldn't qualify if they were walking on the earth right now, because Jesus actually reached out to those who didn't pray like him or think like him or worship with him. The vast majority of Catholic ministries and outreaches don't ask for people to show their Catholic card before they come in the door and are served. We serve our neighbor because that's our call, that's our mission. Right. And so this so-called religious employer exemption is far too narrow. It really only applies, if it applies at all, to a minuscule number of employees. And so we protested this long in advance. We anticipated it in objecting at the Institute of Medicine meetings when I and other women, other men said, from various faith backgrounds, said pregnancy is not a disease, and moreover, if you treat it as such, you'll be putting people like us and many who are like us between a rock and a hard place.
But they clearly are treating it as a disease. It's under preventative medicine. They've classified contraceptive, sterilization, and abortifacient drugs. So this is also a total abdication of the promise that we wouldn't have any funding of abortion. If you've got an abortifacient drug, don't you have abortion effectively?
Yeah, you basically do with the one or two drugs that are abortifacients. So in a sense, we're already there. But then there's also sterilization. You know, people talk about the contraceptive mandate, but they ignore that what we're talking about is forced coverage of sterilization. That means the Catholic employers have to provide, they have to sponsor the coverage. They've got to subsidize the coverage for their employees. We've got individual employees that have to pay premiums on that. We've got insurers, and there are Catholic insurers that have to write those policies against their own conscience. So you've got all those different you might say
layers.
Stakeholders in the process, and all of them may well have conscientious objection to this, and none of them have latitude.
I want to share with both of you and our viewers at home. This is a clip of Archbishop Dolan, Timothy Dolan, who's the president of the Bishops' Conference, reacting to this HHS announcement. Give a listen.
Never before has the federal government forced individuals and organizations to go out into the marketplace and buy a product that violates their conscience. This shouldn't happen in a land where free exercise of religion ranks first in the Bill of Rights. How about letting our elected leaders know that we want religious liberty and rights of conscience restored, and the administration's mandate rescinded?
Deirdre, is this redefining what a Catholic institution is, basically saying that they're non-religious?
It seems to be an attempt to redefine the Catholic organization, the Catholic Church, and her outreaches, to be sure.
Anthony, this is a huge, why risk, what is it, a third of our health care is provided by Catholic institutions? Why risk not only offending, but possibly losing that whole safety net for so many people in this country?
It's astonishing. I mean, basically what the exemption does is it punishes service to the common good, precisely as a function of how Catholic institutions serve the common good, that is to say, when they serve people who are not of the same faith. To that extent, they get denied religious liberty. So you have the government deciding who does and who doesn't get religious liberty. That's problem enough, doing it in a very narrow way, and doing it in a way that gives us an incentive to pull back, to hire people only of our own faith, to serve people only of our own faith. I mean, it's absurd. There are so many layers of absurdity. It's kind of
so many of us were concerned when this bill was being debated, when it was being shaped in the multi-headed hydra form that it took at that place behind me there. And the major concern was there was no conscience clause in the bill at all, meaning this is just the tip of the iceberg, this mandate. We're going to see this in practices being thrust upon hospitals. We're going to see it even in minor ways around the edges. Now you've got Catholic universities taking the government to court because they don't want to provide contraceptives to their students, yet they have to. What is the end game here? And might we see a situation where many of these Catholic hospitals face the choice of living by their conscience or getting out of the Catholic healthcare providing or any kind of Catholic social service?
I mean, my sense is that basically the church is going to resist with every ounce of strength that it has. I mean, that's what needs to happen. As your last guest was saying, the bishops have been leading. They've been leading in a very vigorous way. But that's really only the beginning. They teach, they lead. But at the end of the day, the temporal order is the charge of the laity. And the laity have to step up. And if they don't, this is going to end badly. If they do, it will end well.
Yeah, Catholics tend to wait for the bishops. Well, now you've got bishops out front, putting their neck on the line. I mean, I know Archbishop Dolan was good and ticked. I don't think I'm mischaracterizing his reaction to this.
And the laity are already reacting. Really, they're stepping up. Many leaders, hundreds of leaders, have already signed on to an open letter in objection to this mandate. And they have spheres of influence in the area of not only health care. As you say, there are many hospital CEOs, medical system leaders, but also people who are lay leaders of lay associations, business leaders, academic leaders, these various huge spheres of influence.
What about congressional leaders? Any word from Capitol Hill?
They've not signed on to our letter yet, but then we didn't make an appeal to them specifically. This is to show Congress that there are thousands upon thousands of Catholics behind the bishops. This isn't the bishops speaking out on their own.
Isn't this, Anthony, though, this is really an undermining of the First Amendment right to free exercise of religion, isn't it?
That's true. I mean, it really is a direct assault on the ability of religious institutions to engage in their own internal governance without government interference. You know, we've got these policies, these employment policies, which, among other things, in religious institutions reflect moral values. And you have the government coming in and telling religious institutions that they can't govern themselves the way they need to in accord with their own moral principles, and that is truly unprecedented.
Because it's not just Catholic hospitals, it's Catholic charities, it's Catholic schools, it covers a whole gambit of outreaches by the Church.
Absolutely.
And we shouldn't forget the individual Catholics. The vast majority of Catholics don't work full-time for Catholic organizations. They're in other schools, companies, organizations that have nothing to do as opposed to
and
they're not officially sponsored by the church.
These health
That's
circles.
right, and there will be no option to self-insure in a way that's consistent with our ethical principles.
And now, lay this out for me. What has Archbishop Dolan gets a phone call last Friday. Why, first of all, did the president call him directly? Why not just wait for the news to hit?
You know, that's a question for the president to answer. And, you know, we weren't in on that phone call. As one commentator put it, they'd like to be a fly on the wall to hear it, because so much of this is just mysterious. In other words, what could possibly be the rationale? Why would it possibly make sense to pick a fight with, you know, some subset of a quarter of the population of the United States in an election year?
In an election year, yeah.
I mean, it's baffling. It's really baffling.
Well, and the decision is baffling because not only they said, tough, you're going to have to live by this thing, but they said, but don't worry, we'll give you a year to figure it out, figure out how you're going to comply. What is the point of the year?
Right. It's a fair question. I mean, a cynic might say that it's to kick the can beyond the election. Others might say that it allows for institutional adjustments, which may take time in large institutions. But look, the bottom line is the year doesn't allow time for the mandate to change from the administration's perspective. It may allow litigation to go forward. It may allow legislation to go forward, and both of those things may tend to relieve it. But I think at the end of the day, they don't want to have to deal with the spectacle of the impact of this regulation on its effective date 3 months before the election.
We have a phone call. John from Massachusetts. Go ahead, John. You're on the World Over Live. What's your question? John, you there? John tuned out and went and watched the debate. I knew this would happen. We'll come back. We'll get John. There is a question. It says here, this is from Paul in Orlando, Florida. Now that the Catholic Church in America is at war with the Obama administration, I think that might be a little overplaying it. What are the bishops prepared to do in regard to politicians who are advancing an agenda opposed to church teaching? This is Paul from Orlando, Florida. What do you think?
That's another.
You're not a bishop.
I was about
so
to say it's another good question for a bishop. Yeah, that's a perennial and thorny question about how to deal with particular politicians. It depends on the issue. It depends upon the context. It's a moral, theological, but also pastoral question. It's not one that we're in a position to answer.
Are you all willing to go to court over this? Are you willing to litigate this?
I would say the bishops are willing to. The people who have decided what and when litigation is going to happen haven't decided that yet. But in general, what I would say is that the bishops appear to me at least to be committed to pursuing every means legally available to them to resist this. And like I said, that can include legislation, litigation, public advocacy, just about everything that within the bounds of the law.
Do you see a trend here, Deirdre? The last time we had you on, I think we were talking about this, the refugee and migration grant that was a perennial. The Catholic Church does this better than anybody else, helping victims of human trafficking find their way in the world. They do it on the grassroots level, very cost efficient, and we use the network of Catholic charities to do so. That grant was denied, and it seems the reason it was denied is because we didn't offer these human trafficking victims contraceptives and sterilization and abortion. So we're back where we started again on this thorny issue of reproductive care and preventative care, as it's termed. How do you get around this? Is this a pattern? Is this a war on faith?
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, just the term preventive services or reproductive services itself is something that we need to, in our, if you want to use war language, have in our arsenal to say these are not authentic services, wherever they are, whether they're being offered in our overseas aid or here domestically in our own health plans. That's just a lie. They're not actual authentic services. They're actually, as Dr. Marguerite Duane said in her testimony to the Institute of Medicine over a year ago, she said, there's no other place where we introduce a state of disease and call it health. It really is remarkable, and it's time for the laity to step up even more. We can't necessarily force others to understand us, but we can speak up. We can speak to those congresspersons and let them know that there's a wave of Catholics here who want them to do the right thing, to support the Respect for Rights of Conscience Act and the Protect Life Act, both of which would be real steps in the right direction.
Do you see the pattern here, Anthony? Does this concern you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically what we're dealing with is apparently systemic priority on what Deirdre, I think, accurately called a series of lies about the human person and the way the human person reproduces. And as a result of that systemic distortion, we see it kind of cropping up in a lot of different places. We see it in the contract situation that you described. We see it here again. I mean, just and absurdities flow from that. I mean, let me give you another example. Sure. Preventive services are, again, they're mandatory. They've got to be in every plan. There are other services called essential services. Those will also be mandated. But what the administration has done recently is it's left that to the states. So the states have flexibility in defining that. So let's say the states want to include cancer drugs or not include cancer drugs. They want to include AIDS treatments, but they don't want to include.
But there are 28 states that have the same requirement.
They do, but it's a more flexible requirement. But the point is this: states have flexibility to not provide coverage, and certainly they can't require that those things, or I say they are free to not require those things be in plans.
Right.
States are not free to leave contraception out. So in other words, all those other drugs, as critical as they are to human health, are not given the same priority that contraception is. So we see how contraception is given this enormous priority in that context. In the contracts that you were referring to,
right.
We provide the services better than anyone else, but you know, the really critically important thing is forcing people on contraception.
And abortion.
Everything else bows to it. It's just, it's amazing. I mean,
is this a political payback? Is that what you think is driving this?
I don't know.
The president wanting to keep the Planned Parenthood folks and like-minded pro-abortion advocates happy?
I don't know. Again, you know, when it comes to the question of the motives, I just cannot begin to understand.
No, it doesn't make any
what's
sense.
behind it. Yeah.
It's a very confusing, and particularly in a volatile political season.
The other thing it doesn't make sense is a lot of your listeners and watchers might be thinking, well, but contraception might reduce unplanned and unwanted pregnancies and therefore bring down the abortion rate, and aren't we for that? But the reality is not one study, even by contraceptive protagonists and promoters, has been shown to actually reduce unwanted pregnancy when you have greater access to contraception, even the morning after pill. Pregnancy rates do not go down, and abortion rates do not go down. Sometimes they go up, but what does go up is the rate of sexually transmitted infections and diseases.
Which
we're trying to prevent.
Yeah, which is the thing we're trying to prevent.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm still not following any of this.
Yeah.
Let's go to John in Massachusetts. You're still there, John?
Yes, I am.
Good. What's your question?
Does your guest believe that the Catholic Church might close its hospitals unless we get conscience protected, and maybe we'll give them a year to conform to us?
Anthony, what do you think?
It's hard to say. I mean, basically, the bottom line problem with this regulation is that it leaves us with options ranging from bad to bad to bad. It's very hard to predict which of those very bad choices will be chosen, which is why at this point it's just the goal is just resistance in every legal way possible, and in a sense we're not going to get into sort of speculation about what happens if we lose, because we're determined not to lose.
I'm amazed at the diversity of Catholics from across the political and religious spectrum, I might add, who have all embraced the outrage over this mandate. I mean, it's universal. It's very rare to find a moment like that where Catholics come to such quick agreement on something, and yet it seems in this issue the president has discovered it. Are you surprised by how quickly everyone is sort of galvanized behind this?
Not really. I mean, I think for a couple of reasons. One of them has to do with the fact that folks, so to speak, on the Catholic left believe that the president would do the right thing, and you know, for political and other reasons, they believe that to be the case. And I think it was a reasonable guess that he would, in this case, do that. But then he didn't, and I think so. There's a sense of
betrayal.
You know, yeah. I think there's that aspect too. Now, here's the other point, though. Yeah. You know, some of it has to do with sort of the dynamics of which way people may lean politically, but I think it goes well beyond that, because you have consensus not just within the Catholic community, but in the ecumenical community, the Christian Church, and even in the interfaith community. We have Jewish groups, for example, standing up alongside us and just making clear. And again, these are folks who really don't have any meaningful qualms about contraception. They understand that the core issue here is religious liberty, and the best way to make inroads against religious liberty is to go after the unpopular beliefs first. You know, as the saying goes, it's like, you know, if you don't stand up when somebody else is being attacked, it's like waiting for the crocodile to eat you last.
Deirdre, you were telling me in the break what the bishops are asking people to do, and part of it is going to the website. Tell us about what's there and how people get involved.
Our main action alert right now is asking people to write to your representative, to your senators, and urge them to co-sponsor the Respect for Rights of Conscience Act. That's been now introduced in both houses, and if you go to usccb.org, you'll see Archbishop Dolan, Cardinal Designate Dolan's video right there. There's a tab next to his video that talks about religious liberty. Click there, then click on conscience protection, and you'll be on a page that has a variety of resources for you. And one of them is the action alert. Click there, it'll send you to an action alert that already has the body text written, but you can modify that. You can say, as a citizen of this state, or as a Catholic who's been a cradle Catholic, or as a recent convert, I stand in support of the bishops.
Okay, I'm going to go. You can go to usccb.org for that line. We will put it on my Facebook page. I'll go right to the page so it'll be there and people can click right through, so they don't have to. Sometimes going through the page is very difficult. Anthony, your take on, and we've gotten a number of emails asking this question. Assuming the Congress passes this bill, what assurance do you have that the president, given that it's his administration that handed this down, would sign it? Won't he just veto the bill?
There's no assurance of that, but that's where the public pressure comes in. That's where it's very important for Catholics, again, across the political spectrum, to step up and make their voices heard. I think if something makes its way all the way through the Congress as well, that will also imply that there's a lot of support for it, that the president may listen to.
But very quickly to both of you, how involved do you think the bishops will be in this political season if they don't get any traction on this come September?
Well, I mean, how involved? They're going to lead on the issue. That's what they do. They lead on issues. They will always lead on issues. They don't
endorse
speak
candidates,
out.
They're not going to be showing up at a rally.
That's right.
Okay, very good. Deirdre McQuade and Anthony Picarello, thank you both for being here, and we'll check in with you as the weeks go on. If you'd like more information, usccb.org is the website. And that is all the time we have. In the meantime, go to RaymondArroyo.com. You can check on my Facebook and Twitter pages. I will link the HHS mandate, the informational document that Deirdre mentioned earlier. It's on the left-hand side of my site. There you'll find the latest news, some commentary, and things you won't find anywhere else. We're so glad to be back bringing you the world over, truly live from our new home here in D.C. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of WTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.